The cold bit through Catherine Walsh's thin coat like 1,000 tiny knives as she stumbled through the snow, cradling her right arm against her chest while pain radiated up to her shoulder in waves that made her vision blur. She had been married to Thomas Walsh for 3 years, and in that time she had learned to read the warning signs in his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands would curl into fists when the whiskey took hold. But tonight, in February of 1878, she had miscalculated, and now she was paying the price in the worst way imaginable. He had grabbed her arm and twisted it with such force that she heard the bone snap before the pain even registered, and then he had thrown her out into the blizzard that had been raging across the Nebraska plains since sundown, locking the door behind her and shouting that she could freeze for all he cared. Catherine had no idea how long she had been walking. The farmhouse they rented was 5 miles outside Fort Kearny, and she knew the general direction of town, but the snow was coming down so thick she could barely see 3 feet in front of her. Her arm hung useless at her side now, and every step sent fresh agony shooting through her body. She was 24 years old, and she was going to die out here in the snow because she had made the mistake of asking her husband why he had spent their last dollar on whiskey instead of flour. The thought made her angry, which was good because the anger gave her something to focus on besides the cold that was seeping into her bones and making her thoughts sluggish. She fell twice, and the second time she was not sure she would be able to get back up. Her skirts were heavy with snow and ice, weighing her down like an anchor. Her broken arm screamed at her every time she moved, and she could feel consciousness starting to slip away at the edges. Maybe it would be easier to just lie here and let the snow cover her. Maybe that would hurt less than trying to keep going. But then she thought about giving Thomas that satisfaction, and she forced herself to her knees, then to her feet, swaying dangerously. She took another step, then another. The wind howled around her like a living thing, and she could no longer feel her feet inside her boots. Another step. Another. She was not sure what she was walking toward anymore, only that she had to keep moving. The light appeared so suddenly that at first she thought she was hallucinating. A warm yellow glow through the swirling white, close enough that she could actually see the outline of a building. Catherine tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely more than a croak. She stumbled forward, reaching for that light like a drowning woman reaching for a rope, and then her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed face first into a snowdrift. She was dimly aware of voices, of strong hands lifting her, of being carried somewhere warm. Then everything went black. When Catherine opened her eyes, the first thing she registered was warmth. Blessed, wonderful warmth that made her whole body ache as feeling started to return to her frozen limbs. The second thing was pain, sharp and insistent in her right arm. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun around her. "Easy now," a deep male voice said, and a hand pressed gently against her shoulder, easing her back down. "You have been through quite an ordeal. Do not try to move too fast." Catherine blinked several times, trying to focus. She was lying on a narrow bed covered with thick wool blankets. The room was small but clean, with rough wooden walls and a pot-belly stove glowing in the corner. A man was sitting beside the bed in a straight-back chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, watching her with concerned green eyes. He was somewhere in his late 20s, she thought, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his flannel shirt. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He had the look of a man who spent his life outdoors, lean and rangy, with calloused hands and broad shoulders. "Where am I?" Catherine managed to ask, her voice coming out rough and cracked. "My cabin," the man said, "about 2 miles outside Fort Kearny. I am Lucas Dalton. I found you collapsed in my yard about an hour ago. You are lucky I came out to check on my horses when I did, or the snow would have buried you by morning." Catherine tried to process this information. "My arm," she said, looking down at it. Someone had removed her coat, and she could see that her right arm had been carefully splinted with 2 pieces of smooth wood and bound with strips of cloth. Lucas's expression grew grim. "It is broken. Clean break of the radius, from what I could tell. I said it as best I could, but you really should see a doctor." "No," Catherine said immediately, the word coming out more forcefully than she intended. "No doctor." Lucas studied her face for a long moment. "Your husband did this to you," he said quietly. It was not a question. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She had learned early in her marriage that tears only made Thomas angrier. "I fell," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "You fell," Lucas repeated, his tone making it clear he did not believe her for a second. "In the middle of a blizzard, 2 miles from my place, with no coat worth mentioning and nothing but a thin dress between you and the cold." "I got lost," Catherine said stubbornly. Lucas sighed and stood up, walking over to the stove. He picked up a pot and poured steaming liquid into a tin cup. "Drink this, Ye," he said, coming back and pressing the cup into her left hand. "It is just beef broth, but it will help warm you from the inside." Catherine took the cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. The broth was rich and salty, and she had not realized how hungry she was until she took the first sip. She drank it slowly, aware of Lucas's eyes on her the whole time. "I have 2 sisters," Lucas said after a while, his voice quiet. "Both married now. One of them, Sarah, she had a husband who liked to use his fists. Took her 3 years before she finally left him, and by then she had a scar over her left eye and 2 missing teeth." He paused. "I am not going to force you to tell me anything you do not want to tell me, but I'm also not going to throw you back out into the snow to return to whatever situation you came from." Catherine felt something crack open inside her chest, some tight knot of fear and shame that she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "His name is Thomas," she whispered. "Thomas Walsh. We have a farm about 5 miles east of here. He was drinking, and I asked him about money, and he got angry." She looked down at her splinted arm. "He broke my arm and threw me out of the house, locked the door behind me." Lucas's jaw tightened, and Catherine saw his hands curl into fists. But his voice remained calm when he spoke. "Then you will stay here until you are healed. I have plenty of supplies to last through the winter, and this storm looks like it will be going for at least another day or 2. After that, we can figure out what you want to do." "I cannot just stay here," Catherine protested weakly. "It would not be proper. People would talk." "Let them talk," Lucas said flatly. "I would rather have people gossip than have you freeze to death or go back to a man who breaks your bones. Besides, the nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and I doubt anyone is venturing out in this weather." Catherine wanted to argue, but the truth was she had nowhere else to go. She had no family in Nebraska. Her parents had died in a house fire back in Ohio when she was 19, and she had married Thomas 6 months later because he had seemed kind and stable, and she had been alone and scared. Her sister lived in Philadelphia with her own family, but that might as well have been the moon for all the good it did Catherine now. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will try not to be too much trouble." Lucas's expression softened slightly. "You are no trouble. Now you should rest. Your body has been through a trauma, and sleep is the best medicine for that. I will be right here if you need anything." Catherine wanted to protest that he did not need to stay, but exhaustion was already pulling at her, dragging her down into darkness. The last thing she was aware of was Lucas pulling the blankets up higher around her shoulders, his touch surprisingly gentle for such strong hands. When she woke again, pale gray light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm was still raging outside, and Catherine could hear the wind howling around the corners of the building. Lucas was standing at a small table near the stove, doing something that involved flour and a mixing bowl. "What time is it?" Catherine asked, her voice still rough. Lucas turned, and she saw relief flash across his face. "Mid-morning, near as I can tell. Hard to say exactly with this storm. How are you feeling?" Catherine took inventory. Her arm throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and her whole body felt stiff and sore. but she was warm and alive, which was more than she had expected when she had been stumbling through the snow. "Better," she said, "sore, but better." "Good," Lucas said. He went back to whatever he was doing. "I am making biscuits. Nothing fancy, but they will fill your stomach. You need to keep your strength up while you heal." Catherine watched him work, fascinated despite herself. Thomas had never cooked a meal in his life, considering it woman's work. But Lucas moved around his small kitchen area with practiced efficiency, mixing and kneading the dough with confident hands. Within 20 minutes, the cabin was filled with the smell of fresh baked biscuits, and Catherine's stomach rumbled loudly. Lucas laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I will take that as a good sign," he said. He brought her a plate with 2 biscuits and a generous helping of butter, then helped her sit up carefully, propping pillows behind her back so she could eat without straining her arm. The biscuits were surprisingly good, flaky, and light, and Catherine devoured both of them before she even realized what she was doing. Lucas watched with what looked like approval, then brought her 2 more without being asked. "You are a good cook," Catherine said between bites. Lucas shrugged. "Necessity. I have been on my own since I was 17. Had to learn fast or starve." "What do you do?" Catherine asked. "For a living, I mean." "I work as a cowboy," Lucas said, settling back into his chair with his own plate of biscuits. "I have a small herd of cattle that I'm trying to build up, and I hire out for cattle drives and ranch work when I need extra money. It is not glamorous, but it keeps me fed and puts a roof over my head." "You live here alone?" "For the past 3 years. Before that, I worked for a big ranch about 20 miles south of here, but I saved up enough to buy this piece of land and start my own operation. It is slow going, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice when he said it. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the storm providing a constant backdrop. Catherine found herself studying Lucas when he was not looking, noting the way his hair fell across his forehead, the strong lines of his profile, the easy grace with which he moved. He was nothing like Thomas. Where her husband was stocky and barrel-chested with a red face and mean little eyes, Lucas was lean and tall with kind eyes and a face that looked like it smiled often even though it was serious now. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Catherine asked suddenly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." Lucas met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because someone should have helped my sister Sarah sooner. And maybe things would not have gotten as bad as they did because you are a human being in need, and I am not the kind of man who can turn his back on that." He paused. "And because you have kind eyes, even when they are full of hurt, that tells me something about who you are." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such simple decency. "I used to be different," she said quietly. "Before I married Thomas. I used to laugh more. Used to sing. My mother always said I had a pretty voice." "What changed?" Lucas asked gently. Catherine looked down at her hands. "Thomas did not like it when I sang. Said it gave him a headache. Then he did not like it when I smiled too much at other people, said I was flirting. Then he did not like it when I talked at church socials, said I was embarrassing him. After a while, it was just easier to be quiet, to make myself small, to try not to draw his attention unless absolutely necessary." She blinked hard against the tears that were threatening again. "I do not know who I am anymore. I have spent 3 years walking on eggshells, and I'm not sure what is left of the girl I used to be." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "She is still in there. You are still in there. It might take time to find her again, but she is not gone. A man like that, he can hurt you. He can make you afraid, but he cannot destroy who you really are unless you let him." Catherine looked up and found Lucas watching her with such intensity that it made her breath catch. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you are still fighting. You did not lie down and die in that snow. You kept walking, even when it would have been easier to give up. That takes strength, Catherine, more strength than most people have." It was the first time he had used her name, and hearing it in his deep voice made something flutter in her chest. She realized with a start that she was attracted to this man, to his quiet strength and his gentle hands and his steady presence. The thought terrified her. She was still married, still tied to Thomas by law and by vows she had taken in good faith 3 years ago. She had no right to feel this way about another man, but Thomas had broken those vows long before tonight, she thought bitterly. He had promised to love and cherish her, to protect her and care for her. Instead, he had broken her arm and left her to die in a blizzard. Surely that released her from any obligation to honor her own promises. "Tell me about your cattle," Catherine said, desperate to change the subject before Lucas could see what she was thinking, written all across her face. "You said you have a herd?" If Lucas noticed her abrupt shift in topic, he did not comment on it. 20 head right now, he said. "Not much, but it is a start. I am hoping to double that by the end of next year. The land here is good for grazing, and there's a creek that runs through the property year-round, so water's not a problem." They talked for the rest of the morning, Lucas telling her about his plans for the ranch and his dreams of building something lasting. Catherine found herself relaxing, drawn into his enthusiasm and his clear vision for the future. It had been so long since she had talked with someone like this, just comfortable conversation between two people with no fear of saying the wrong thing and sparking anger. The storm continued to rage all through that day and into the night. Lucas gave Catherine the bed and made himself a pallet on the floor near the stove. Despite her protests, he checked her arm regularly, watching for signs of swelling or fever that might indicate infection. He brought her food and water, helped her to the small privy out back when necessary with his eyes carefully averted to preserve her modesty, and sat with her in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. On the second day, Catherine felt strong enough to sit up for longer periods. Her arm still hurt, but it was a manageable pain now. More of a persistent ache than the sharp agony of the first night. Lucas found her some of his clothes to wear, a flannel shirt, and a pair of trousers that she had to roll up several times to keep from tripping over them. It felt strange to be wearing men's clothing, almost scandalous, but it was also oddly freeing. "Your dress is still drying by the fire," Lucas explained when he saw her looking at it. "It was soaked through. These will be more comfortable while you recover anyway." Catherine had to admit he was right. The loose trousers and soft shirt were infinitely more comfortable than her corset and heavy skirts. She found she could move more easily, breathe more deeply. "I like them," she admitted shyly. Lucas grinned at her, and Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. His whole face transformed when he smiled, the serious lines smoothing out and his eyes lighting up with warmth. "They suit you," he said. "You look like a proper ranch hand now." By the third day, the storm had finally blown itself out, leaving a world transformed by snow. Everything was white as far as the eye could see, pristine and beautiful in the weak winter sunlight. Lucas went out to tend to his horses and check on his cattle, leaving Catherine alone in the cabin for the first time since she had arrived. She stood at the window looking out at the endless expanse of white and thought about Thomas. She wondered if he was looking for her, if he even cared that she had not come back. Probably not. He was likely still drunk or nursing a hangover and cursing her for making him angry in the first place. The thought made her feel hollow inside, not sad exactly, but empty. She had loved Thomas once, or thought she had. Now she could barely remember what that feeling had been like. She heard Lucas return, stamping the snow off his boots before he came inside. "Everything all right out there?" she asked. "All the animals are fine. Snow is deep, though, probably 4 feet in drifts. It will make travel difficult for a while." He hung up his coat and came to stand beside her at the window. "How is your arm?" "Better. Still sore, but better." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the snow. Catherine was acutely aware of Lucas's presence beside her, the warmth of his body just inches away from hers. "What happens now?" Catherine asked quietly. Lucas was quiet for a long moment before answering. That depends on what you want to happen. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. Or if you want, I can take you into Fort Kearney once the roads are passable. There is a boarding house there run by a woman named Mrs. Henderson. She is good people. She might have work for you if you're looking to stay in town. And if I want to go back to Thomas? Catherine asked. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to know what Lucas would say. Lucas's jaw tightened. Then I will not stop you. You are a grown woman who can make your own choices, but I will tell you straight that I think it would be a mistake. A man who hurts you once will hurt you again. That is something I learned from watching my sister suffer. What did she do, your sister Sarah? She left. Finally got up the courage one day when her husband was passed out drunk and just walked away. She came to stay with me for a few months while she figured out what she wanted to do next. Eventually she moved to Denver and found work as a seamstress. Last I heard, she had met a good man, a banker, and they were talking about marriage. But what about the law? Was she not still married? Lucas shrugged. Technically, yes, but her husband never came looking for her. And out here in the West, people do not ask too many questions about where you came from or what you left behind. If you want a fresh start, you can have one. It might not be strictly legal, but sometimes survival matters more than legality. Catherine absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. Could she really just walk away from her marriage? Start over somewhere new? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Over the next few days, Catherine grew stronger. Her arm was healing well, with no signs of infection, and she was able to do more around the cabin. She insisted on helping with meals and cleaning, feeling guilty about being useless while Lucas did all the work. He protested at first, worried that she would hurt herself, but eventually relented when he saw how much it meant to her to contribute. They fell into an easy routine. Lucas would go out in the mornings to tend to his animals and do the heavy work around the property. Catherine would make breakfast and tidy up the cabin, working one-handed with determined efficiency. They would eat lunch together, then spend the afternoons working on small projects. Lucas was always fixing something, mending tack or sharpening tools, and Catherine would sit nearby and keep him company, talking or reading aloud from the few books Lucas owned. The evenings were Catherine's favorite time. After supper, they would sit by the fire, Lucas in his chair and Catherine on the bed wrapped in a blanket. Sometimes they would talk for hours about their childhoods, their dreams, their thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. Catherine found herself watching Lucas more and more, memorizing the way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused. She was falling in love with him. She knew it was foolish and dangerous and complicated, but she could not seem to stop it. Every day she spent with Lucas made her more certain that what she felt for Thomas had never been real love. It had been desperation and loneliness and the need to belong somewhere. What she felt for Lucas was different, deeper. It was the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps on the porch. It was the way she felt safe for the first time in years. It was the way he made her laugh and think and remember who she used to be. A week after she had arrived, Catherine woke in the middle of the night to find Lucas sitting in his chair, wide awake, and staring into the dying embers of the fire. She could tell by the set of his shoulders that something was troubling him. "Lucas," she said softly, "are you all right?" He turned to look at her, and even in the dim light she could see the conflict in his eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to wake you." "You did not. I just happened to wake up and saw you sitting there." Catherine sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "What is wrong?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, as if debating whether to speak. Finally he said, "This cannot continue." Catherine felt her heart drop into her stomach. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean, Catherine. Us, living together like this, people are going to talk. I do not care about my own reputation, but I care about yours, and more than that." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "More than that, I am starting to care about you too much. More than I should. more than is proper for a man to care about another man's wife. Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. I care about you too, she whispered. Lucas closed his eyes as if her words caused him physical pain. You do not know how much I wanted to hear you say that, and how much I wish you had not. Why? Because you are married, Catherine. Because as much as I might wish otherwise, you belong to another man. Because what I feel for you, what I want with you, it is not right. Not while you still wear his ring. Catherine looked down at her left hand, at the thin gold band that Thomas had placed there 3 years ago. It had symbolized a promise, a commitment. But Thomas had broken that commitment the first time he raised his hand to her. She pulled the ring off slowly, wincing as it caught on her knuckle, and held it out in her palm. I do not want to be his wife anymore, she said clearly. I do not love him. I am not sure I ever really did. And even if I did once, he killed whatever feelings I had the night he broke my arm and left me to die. Catherine, no, let me finish. I know that legally I am still married to him. I know that what I feel for you is complicated and may be wrong by society's standards. But I also know that I have spent 3 years of my life living in fear, making myself smaller and quieter and less than I am, just to avoid a man's anger. And I know that in the week I have spent with you, I have felt more like myself than I have in all those 3 years combined. She set the ring down on the table beside the bed. I am not asking you to do anything about it. I'm just telling you the truth. Lucas stared at her for a long moment, his green eyes intense in the firelight. Then he stood up and crossed the small space between them in 3 long strides. He knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to eye level with her, and cupped her face gently in his hands. You are the bravest woman I have ever met, he said, his voice rough with emotion, and the kindest and the strongest. And if I let myself, I could fall in love with you so easily it terrifies me. Then let yourself, Catherine whispered, let yourself fall. I will catch you. I promise. Lucas leaned forward and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Catherine had been kissed before, but never like this. Thomas's kisses had been demanding and rough, taking what he wanted with no thought for what she might need. Lucas kissed her like she was precious, like she mattered, like her pleasure was just as important as his own. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. We should wait, he said. We should do this properly. Let you get a divorce. Make it legal. I know, Catherine said, and we will. But I need you to know that I choose you, Lucas Dalton. In my heart, where it matters, I choose you. I choose you too, Lucas said, and I will wait as long as it takes to make you mine the right way. They spent the rest of the night talking, making plans. Catherine would stay at the cabin until she was fully healed. Then Lucas would help her get settled in Fort Kearney. She would find work and a place to stay, and Lucas would help her navigate the legal process of divorcing Thomas. It would not be easy. Divorces were scandalous and difficult to obtain, especially for women. But Lucas had a friend in town, a lawyer named James, who owed him a favor. They would find a way. In the morning, everything looked different to Catherine. The world outside was still white with snow, but now it looked clean and new rather than cold and threatening. She felt lighter than she had in years, as if some great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She caught Lucas looking at her while they ate breakfast, and when their eyes met, they both smiled like fools. 2 days later, a rider approached the cabin. Catherine saw him first, looking out the window while Lucas was in the barn. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the stocky figure on the big bay horse, Thomas. Lucas, she called, her voice high and tight with fear. Lucas, he is here. Lucas came running from the barn, his hand automatically going to the gun belt he wore when he was working outside. He positioned himself between Catherine and the door as Thomas dismounted and stomped up to the porch. The pounding on the door made Catherine flinch. "Catherine!" Thomas bellowed. "Catherine, I know you are in there. Get out here right now." Lucas opened the door but stood blocking the entrance with his body. "She is not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice calm but hard as iron. Thomas's face was flushed red with anger. Up close, Catherine could see that he had not shaved in days and his clothes were rumpled and stained. "That is my wife in there, and I will thank you to step aside. This is between me and her." "Your wife has a broken arm that you gave her before you threw her out into a blizzard to die," Lucas said. "That makes it my business. Now get off my property." "Not without my wife." "Then you are not leaving because she is staying here." Thomas tried to push past Lucas, but Lucas grabbed him by the front of his coat and shoved him back hard enough that Thomas stumbled off the porch and landed on his backside in the snow. Thomas scrambled to his feet, his hand going for the gun at his belt. "I would not do that if I were you," Lucas said quietly. His own hand was resting on his gun, and there was something in his eyes that made Thomas hesitate. "I am a fair shot, and I have every legal right to defend myself and my guest on my own property. You want to draw on me, go ahead, but I guarantee you will not like how it ends." Catherine watched from inside the cabin, her heart in her throat. She could see the calculation in Thomas's eyes, weighing his anger against his sense of self-preservation. "You cannot keep her," Thomas said finally, his voice ugly. "She is my wife. The law is on my side." "The law says a man cannot try to murder his wife," Lucas countered, "and that is what you did when you broke her arm and threw her out into that storm. There were witnesses in town who saw me bring her in half frozen. People will testify to what they saw. You think a judge is going to side with you after hearing that?" "She is nothing but a lying whore anyway," Thomas spat. "Probably spreading her legs for you already, is she not? That is what she does, opens up for any man who shows her a bit of attention." Catherine felt like she had been slapped. She knew the words were lies, vicious and meant to hurt, but they still stung. Lucas's expression went cold as stone. "Get off my land," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Get off my land right now, or I swear I will put a bullet through your knee and leave you to crawl back to that excuse for a farm you rent. Catherine is under my protection, and if you come near her again, if you even look in her direction, I will make you regret it. Do you understand me?" Something in Lucas's tone must have finally penetrated Thomas's alcohol-soaked brain. He took a step back, then another. "This is not over," he said, trying to salvage some dignity. "I will go to the sheriff. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of woman she is, what kind of man you are." "You do that," Lucas said, "and I will make sure everyone knows what kind of man breaks his wife's arm and leaves her to freeze to death. See which one of us comes out looking worse." Thomas stood there for another long moment, his face twisted with impotent rage. Then he turned and stomped back to his horse, hauling himself into the saddle. He wheeled the horse around and kicked it into a gallop, sending up sprays of snow as he disappeared down the road. Lucas stood on the porch until Thomas was completely out of sight, then came back inside. Catherine was shaking, whether from fear or anger or relief she could not say. Lucas pulled her into his arms, careful of her injured arm, and held her while she trembled against his chest. "He is gone," Lucas murmured into her hair. "He is gone, and I will not let him hurt you again. I promise you that." "He will make trouble," Catherine said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "He will tell people awful things. He will try to ruin both of us." "Let him try. I have lived in this area for 10 years. People know me, know what kind of man I am. Your husband is a drunk who rents a failing farm and causes trouble every time he comes to town. Who do you think they will believe?" Catherine wanted to take comfort in his words, but she knew how the world worked. A woman's reputation was a fragile thing, easily shattered and nearly impossible to repair. Even if people believed that Thomas was the villain, they would still whisper about her, about the impropriety of her staying alone with an unmarried man. She would be marked as fallen, ruined, not respectable. As if reading her thoughts, Lucas tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. I know what you are thinking, and I will not lie to you. Some people will talk. Some people will judge. But there are also good people in this world, people who will see the truth and stand by us. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house, she is one of them. Sheriff Morrison is a fair man. My friend James, the lawyer, he will help us. We are not alone in this, Catherine. Why are you doing this? Catherine asked. Why are you risking so much for me? Lucas smiled, soft and tender. Because I love you. I know it has only been a week, and I know that sounds crazy, but I do. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you sing under your breath when you think I cannot hear you. I love the way you make me laugh and the way you make me think. I love who I am when I am with you. He paused, his eyes searching hers. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all men are like your husband, that you deserve to be loved and cherished and protected. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, happy tears. I love you too, she said. I know I should not. I know it is too fast and too complicated, but I do. I love you, Lucas. They kissed again, and this time it was deeper, more passionate. Catherine felt like she was drowning in sensation, in the taste of him, and the feel of his hands on her body, and the sheer overwhelming rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. We should still wait, Lucas said, though he did not sound entirely convinced, until the divorce is final, until we can do things right. I know, Catherine agreed reluctantly, but it is hard to want to wait when all I want is to be with you completely. I know. Believe me, I know, but I want our first time together to be without any shadow hanging over it. I want you to be mine legally and morally with no doubts or regrets. Catherine nodded, knowing he was right even as every fiber of her being screamed to ignore propriety and consequences. They had waited this long. They could wait a little longer. The next day, Lucas took Catherine into Fort Kearny. The roads were still difficult, with deep snow making travel slow. But Lucas's horse was strong and sure-footed. Catherine rode behind him, her good arm wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his back. Despite the cold and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt happier than she had in years. Fort Kearny was a small town, just a handful of streets with businesses and houses clustered around the old military fort that had given the town its name. Lucas took Catherine directly to the boarding house, a 2-story building with white paint and green shutters that looked well-maintained and welcoming. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She listened to Lucas's explanation of Catherine's situation with a face that gave nothing away, and Catherine felt her stomach churning with anxiety. This woman held Catherine's immediate future in her hands. When Lucas finished talking, Mrs. Henderson turned to Catherine. "Let me see your arm, dear." Catherine held out her splinted arm, and Mrs. Henderson examined it with gentle but efficient hands. "Lucas set this?" "Yes, madam." "He did a good job. You were lucky he found you." Mrs. Henderson looked Catherine in the eye. "I am going to ask you something, and I want the honest truth. Did your husband really break this arm and throw you out into that blizzard?" "Yes, madam," Catherine said quietly. "I can show you the bruises where he grabbed me if you need proof." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "That will not be necessary, I believe you. I have seen Thomas Walsh drunk in town often enough to know what kind of man he is." She turned to Lucas. "You are sure about this, Lucas? Taking her part against her husband? It will cause talk." "I am sure," Lucas said firmly. "I will not stand by and let a woman suffer when I can help." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "All right then. Catherine, you can stay here. I have a small room on the second floor that is currently empty. In exchange for room and board, you can help me with the cooking and cleaning. Once your arm is healed, we can discuss more permanent arrangements." Catherine felt weak with relief. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much. I will work hard, I promise." "I am sure you will," Mrs. Henderson said. "Now come along. Let me show you to your room and get you settled." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the main street. It was not much, but it was hers, and that made it feel like a palace. Mrs. Henderson left her to unpack the few things Lucas had brought from the cabin, promising to call her down for supper. Lucas lingered at the door, his hat in his hands. "Will you be all right here?" "I will be fine," Catherine assured him. "Mrs. Henderson seems kind." "She is. She will take good care of you." Lucas hesitated, then said, "I will come by tomorrow to check on you, and I will go see James about starting the divorce proceedings." "All right." Catherine wanted to throw herself into his arms again, but she was too aware of Mrs. Henderson somewhere downstairs, probably listening. Instead, she just reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for everything, Lucas. I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have found a way. You are stronger than you know." Lucas squeezed her hand back, then reluctantly let go. "I should go, but I will see you tomorrow." After he left, Catherine sat on the bed and looked around her small room. This was it, the beginning of her new life. It was terrifying and exhilarating and overwhelming all at once. She thought about Thomas, probably sitting in the farmhouse right now, nursing his anger and his whiskey. She thought about the gossip that would start once word got around about her living at the boarding house while still technically married. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, but then she thought about Lucas's smile, the way he made her feel safe and valued and loved. She thought about the future they could build together once she was free, and she decided that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were worth facing for the chance at real happiness. Over the next few weeks, Catherine settled into her new life in Fort Kearny. She helped Mrs. Henderson with cooking and cleaning, working hard despite her still healing arm. The other residents of the boarding house were mostly traveling salesmen and cowboys passing through, men who nodded politely but did not ask questions. Mrs. Henderson made it clear that Catherine was under her protection, and most people seemed willing to respect that. Lucas came to visit every few days, always properly and during daylight hours so as not to fuel gossip. They would sit in the boarding house parlor talking and laughing while Mrs. Henderson worked nearby like a benevolent chaperone. Sometimes Lucas would bring Catherine small gifts, a book he thought she would like, or a ribbon for her hair. Catherine treasured these tokens, not for their material value, but for what they represented, proof that Lucas was thinking about her, that she mattered to him. The lawyer, James Crawford, agreed to take Catherine's case. He was a serious young man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a methodical way of thinking. He explained that divorces were difficult in Nebraska, that Catherine would need to prove grounds such as cruelty or abandonment. The broken arm would help, especially since Lucas could testify to finding her half frozen in the snow. But it would still take time, possibly months, to work through the legal system. Thomas, meanwhile, did exactly what he had threatened. He went to anyone who would listen and told them that Catherine was an adulteress who had run off with a cowboy. He claimed that Lucas had seduced her, that she was living in sin, that she was a disgrace. Some people believed him. Catherine saw the way certain women would cross to the other side of the street when they saw her coming, the way conversations would stop when she entered the general store. But for every person who judged her, there was someone else who offered support. The sheriff, a gray-haired man named Morrison, made it clear that he believed Catherine's story and that Thomas would face consequences if he caused any more trouble. Several of the local women, ones who had their own experiences with difficult husbands, went out of their way to be kind to Catherine. The owner of the general store, Mr. Patterson, gave her credit when she needed supplies. Slowly, Catherine began to build a network of allies in the town. Spring came slowly to Nebraska that year, the snow melting inch by stubborn inch to reveal brown earth and the first hints of green. Catherine's arm healed well, and James removed the splint 6 weeks after Lucas had set the bone. Her arm was stiff and weak at first, but with exercises Lucas showed her, she gradually regained strength and flexibility. On a warm day in late April, Lucas took Catherine on a picnic out to his ranch. They rode out together on his horse, Lucas in the saddle and Catherine sitting sideways in front of him, his arm around her waist to keep her steady. The prairie was coming alive with spring flowers, brilliant splashes of color against the new grass, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Lucas spread a blanket near the creek that ran through his property, and they ate the lunch Catherine had packed while his cattle grazed peacefully nearby. It was peaceful and perfect, and Catherine felt her heart swell with contentment. The divorce should be final in about 6 more weeks, Lucas said as they sat watching the water flow by. James says the judge is sympathetic to your situation. And then what? Catherine asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Lucas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. And then I am going to ask you properly to marry me, with a ring and a proposal and everything done the right way, but I'm going to tell you now what I plan to say then just so you know what is coming. He took a deep breath. Catherine Walsh, you are the strongest, bravest, kindest woman I have ever known. You make me laugh, and you make me think, and you make me want to be a better man. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build this ranch with you, build a family with you, build a future with you. I want to grow old with you and love you every day we have together. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face again, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said. The answer is yes, Lucas. Today, tomorrow, 6 weeks from now, it will always be yes. Lucas kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and said, 6 more weeks. We can wait 6 more weeks, and then you will be mine, and I will be yours, and nothing will ever separate us again. Those 6 weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Catherine continued working at the boarding house, saving every penny she could for her future with Lucas. Lucas worked his ranch and made improvements, building an addition onto the cabin that would serve as a proper bedroom for them. They saw each other as often as propriety allowed, always with Mrs. Henderson or some other chaperone present, always holding themselves back from what they really wanted. Finally, in mid-June of 1878, James Crawford came to the boarding house with papers in hand and a smile on his face. "It is done," he said. "The judge granted the divorce. You are a free woman, Catherine." Catherine took the papers with shaking hands, reading the legal language that officially severed her ties to Thomas Walsh. She was free. After 3 years of marriage and months of waiting, she was finally, legally free. Lucas proposed that very evening, going down on one knee in Mrs. Henderson's parlor with a ring he had bought in Omaha on a recent cattle-buying trip. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy, but to Catherine it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She said yes with tears streaming down her face while Mrs. Henderson beamed like a proud mother. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Fort Kearny. Mrs. Henderson stood up with Catherine, and James Crawford served as Lucas's best man. Sheriff Morrison attended, along with Mr. and Mrs. Patterson from the general store, and about a dozen other townspeople who had supported Catherine through her ordeal. Thomas did not appear, and for that Catherine was grateful. She did not want anything to mar this perfect day. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, and she carried wild flowers that Lucas had picked for her that morning. When the preacher asked if she took Lucas to be her lawfully wedded husband, she said, "I do," with a clear, strong voice that carried through the church. When Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, replacing the one she had thrown away months ago, she felt something settle into place deep in her soul. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. The kiss Lucas gave her when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife was sweet and chaste, appropriate for a church full of people, but the look in his eyes promised that there would be time for more later, when they were finally, blessedly alone. Mrs. Henderson hosted a small reception at the boarding house with cake and punch and well wishes all around. Then, as the sun was setting, Lucas helped Catherine up onto his horse and they rode out to the ranch that was now their home. The cabin looked beautiful in the golden light of dusk. Lucas had hung lanterns on the porch, and their warm glow made the whole place look welcoming and inviting. He lifted Catherine down from the horse, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" Catherine laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Lucas said with a grin. "It is tradition." He carried her inside, kicking the door closed behind them, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. The cabin was clean and neat, with fresh flowers on the table and the stove radiating warmth. Lucas had clearly put effort into making it special for their first night as husband and wife. Catherine turned to face him, suddenly feeling shy despite everything they had been through together. "I am your wife now," she said softly. "You are my wife," Lucas agreed. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "My beautiful, brave, amazing wife. I love you, Catherine Dalton." "I love you too," Catherine whispered. Then she added, "Take me to bed, husband." Lucas needed no further encouragement. He led her to the new bedroom he had built, where a wide bed covered with a beautiful quilt waited for them. They undressed each other slowly, nervously, both aware that this was the first time for them together and wanting it to be perfect. When they finally came together, skin to skin, Catherine thought she might die from the intensity of it. Lucas was gentle and patient, mindful of her inexperience and her past trauma. He made love to her like she was precious, like she was cherished, like she was the most important person in his world. And when they finally reached completion together, Catherine felt tears on her cheeks and realized that for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be truly, completely loved. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Catherine's head on Lucas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Was it all right?" Lucas asked softly, his hand running through her hair. "It was perfect," Catherine said. "You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Lucas said with a laugh, "but I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy, happier than I ever thought I could be." They made love twice more that night, each time slower and more exploratory than the last, learning each other's bodies and preferences. By the time they finally drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Catherine felt utterly content, utterly safe, utterly home. The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and deep happiness. Catherine threw herself into making the ranch a success, working alongside Lucas from dawn to dusk. She learned how to care for cattle, how to mend fences, how to manage the practical aspects of running a ranch. It was exhausting work, harder than anything she had done before, but she loved every minute of it. She loved the feeling of accomplishment when they successfully delivered a calf or completed a difficult repair. She loved the way Lucas looked at her with pride when she mastered a new skill. She loved falling into bed exhausted each night and waking up beside the man she loved each morning. They also worked on building their reputation in the community. Catherine joined the Church Ladies Auxiliary and helped organize charity events. Lucas served on the town council and helped mediate disputes between ranchers. Slowly but surely, people stopped seeing Catherine as the scandalous woman who had left her husband and started seeing her as Lucas Dalton's capable wife, a woman who had survived hardship with grace and strength. Thomas Walsh left Nebraska that fall, reportedly heading to California to seek his fortune. Catherine heard the news with mixed feelings. She was relieved to know he was gone, that she would not have to worry about running into him in town or hearing his vicious gossip. But she also felt a strange kind of pity for him. He was a broken man, eaten up by his own anger and his addiction, and she doubted he would find what he was looking for in California or anywhere else. In the spring of 1879, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening over supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. She need not have worried. Lucas let out a whoop of joy, swept her up in his arms, and spun her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," Lucas said wonderingly, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." You are going to be a wonderful father, Catherine said, covering his hand with her own. And you are going to be an amazing mother. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you. The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as summer turned to fall, she found the physical demands of ranch work increasingly difficult. Lucas fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, bringing her little treats to tempt her appetite. Catherine alternated between appreciating his concern and wanting to throttle him for treating her like she was made of glass. In December of 1879, on a cold night with stars blazing in the clear winter sky, Catherine went into labor. Mrs. Henderson came out from town to serve as midwife, along with 2 other women who had experience with childbirth. Lucas paced the kitchen like a caged animal, jumping every time Catherine cried out from the bedroom. After 14 hours of labor, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Lucas came into the bedroom with tears streaming down his face, and Catherine placed their son in his arms. "What should we name him?" she asked. Lucas looked down at the tiny, perfect face of his son. "What about Samuel, after your father?" Catherine felt her own eyes fill with tears. She had told Lucas about her father, about how much she had loved him and how much she still missed him. The fact that Lucas remembered and wanted to honor that memory meant everything to her. "Samuel Dalton," she said. "It is perfect." Little Samuel was an easy baby, happy and healthy and quick to smile. Lucas was besotted with him, spending every spare moment holding his son and talking to him in a soft, gentle voice. Catherine would sometimes wake in the middle of the night to find Lucas standing by Samuel's cradle, just watching him sleep with an expression of such pure love on his face that it made her heart ache. The years that followed were full of joy and growth. The ranch prospered, their herd growing year by year until they were one of the more successful operations in the area. Samuel grew into a bright, curious little boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Lucas's sister. 2 years after that came another son, whom they named William. Catherine sometimes thought back to that terrible night when Thomas had broken her arm and thrown her out into the snow. She thought about how close she had come to dying, how different her life could have been if Lucas had not found her. The memory still had the power to make her shudder, but it no longer had the power to hurt her. That night had been the end of one life and the beginning of another, and she would not change what came after for anything in the world. Thomas Walsh died in a saloon fight in San Francisco in 1883. Catherine heard the news from the sheriff, who thought she should know even though they had been divorced for 5 years at that point. She felt a pang of sadness for the waste of it all, for the man Thomas might have been if he had been able to overcome his demons. But mostly she just felt grateful the chapter of her life was truly, finally closed. Lucas continued to be everything Catherine had ever wanted in a partner. He was kind and patient and hardworking. He made her laugh every single day. He was a devoted father who taught their children about honor and integrity and the importance of treating all people with respect. He was a tender lover who still made Catherine's heart race even after years of marriage. He was her best friend, her confidant, her rock. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Catherine with a trip to Omaha. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson, who doted on them like a grandmother, and spent 3 days in the city like honeymooners. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at expensive restaurants, and went to the theater to see a play. But Catherine's favorite part of the trip was the quiet moments in their hotel room. Just the 2 of them talking and laughing and making love without having to worry about little ears overhearing. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked her one evening as they lay in bed watching the sunset through the window. "Giving up the respectable life you might have had for this?" Catherine turned to look at him, shocked. "How can you even ask that? You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lucas Dalton. You and our children are my whole world. I have never regretted choosing you, not for a single moment." "Good," Lucas said, pulling her close, "because I cannot imagine my life without you. You saved me just as much as I saved you that night, you know. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working hard, but with no real purpose beyond survival. You gave me something to work for, something to build toward. You made my life mean something." Catherine kissed him, pouring all her love and devotion into it. "We saved each other," she said, "and we built something beautiful together." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel grew into a tall, serious young man who loved working with the cattle and had a natural head for the business side of ranching. Sarah was bright and bold, with a gift for training horses that amazed everyone who saw her work. William was the family charmer, quick with a joke and a smile, popular with everyone he met. Catherine and Lucas watched their children grow with pride and amazement, marveling at how quickly the years flew by. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years, and persevered through hard ones. They became pillars of the Fort Kearny community, respected and admired by their neighbors. Mrs. Henderson passed away in 1890 at the age of 68. Catherine wept at her funeral, remembering how the older woman had taken a chance on a desperate woman with nowhere else to turn. She had been a true friend, and Catherine made sure that her memory was honored. She and Lucas paid for a beautiful headstone, and Catherine planted flowers on the grave every spring without fail. When Samuel turned 21 in 1900, Lucas decided it was time to start handing over more responsibility to his eldest son. He taught Samuel everything he knew about running the ranch, and Catherine taught him about managing the household accounts and dealing with suppliers. They were grooming him to eventually take over the operation, though Lucas was still very much active and engaged in the daily work. Sarah married a nice young man named Peter Thompson when she was 22. Peter was a horse breeder who shared Sarah's passion for animals, and Lucas and Catherine approved of the match wholeheartedly. They held the wedding at the ranch with half the county in attendance, and Catherine cried happy tears as she watched her daughter pledge her life to a good man who clearly adored her. William announced his intention to become a lawyer like James Crawford, who had helped Catherine with her divorce all those years ago. Lucas and Catherine supported his decision, proud that their youngest son wanted to use his sharp mind to help people. They sent him to law school in Lincoln, and he graduated near the top of his class. As Lucas and Catherine entered their 50s, they began to slow down a bit, leaving more of the physical work to Samuel and the ranch hands they employed. They spent more time sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the prairie, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. "We did good, did we not?" Lucas said one evening in the summer of 1905. They were 60 and 56 respectively, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. "We did very good," Catherine agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly content. 3 wonderful children, a successful ranch, a lifetime of happiness together. I could not have asked for more. "I still remember the night I found you in the snow," Lucas said quietly. "You were so broken and so brave at the same time. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change." "Mine too. You were my miracle, Lucas. My second chance." We were each other's second chances, each other's miracles. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned pink and gold and purple, the colors reflecting off the windows of the house they had built together. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and somewhere inside, Catherine could hear Sarah laughing at something Peter had said. This was what happiness looked like, Catherine thought. Not perfect, not without struggles or sorrows, but full of love and purpose and joy. "I love you, Catherine Dalton," Lucas said, turning to kiss her temple. "I love you too, Lucas Dalton, always and forever." Sarah and Peter eventually gave them 4 grandchildren, while William married a clever woman named Elizabeth and had 3 children of his own. Samuel married a rancher's daughter named Margaret, and they had 2 sons who would eventually carry on the Dalton ranching legacy. Lucas and Catherine delighted in their growing family, hosting big Sunday dinners where the house rang with laughter and conversation and the happy chaos of children playing. Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920 at the age of 75. Catherine woke one morning to find him cold beside her, a slight smile still on his face, as if he had been having a pleasant dream. She held his hand and wept for the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But even through her grief, she was grateful. They had had 42 years of marriage together, more than 4 decades of love and laughter and building a life side by side. Not everyone got that blessing, and Catherine knew how lucky she had been. She buried Lucas on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the prairie he had loved so much. The whole county turned out for the funeral, a testament to the respect and affection people had for Lucas Dalton. Catherine stood between Samuel and Sarah as the preacher said the words, William on Sarah's other side, all of them holding each other up through their shared grief. Catherine lived for another 12 years after Lucas died. She stayed on the ranch, refusing all suggestions that she move to town or go live with one of her children. This was her home, the place she and Lucas had built together, and she would stay here until she joined him. She spent her days helping with the grandchildren, tending her garden, and sitting on the porch, remembering all the good years she and Lucas had shared. She told stories to her grandchildren about the night their grandfather had saved her life, about how he had set her broken arm and nursed her back to health and shown her what real love looked like. She wanted them to know that their grandfather had been a hero, that he had been kind and brave and good. She wanted them to understand that love was not just romance and passion, though there had been plenty of both in her marriage. Love was also patience and partnership, choosing each other every single day, building something lasting and real. Catherine passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1932 at the age of 83. Her children found her in her bed, looking peaceful and younger somehow, the lines of age and care smoothed from her face. They buried her next to Lucas on the hill, their graves side by side beneath a spreading oak tree that Catherine had planted 40 years earlier. The ranch continued on through Samuel and eventually through his sons. The original cabin that Lucas had built, where he had first brought Catherine on that snowy night so many years ago, was preserved as part of the larger house that had grown up around it. The family made sure it was never torn down or altered, keeping it as a reminder of where their story had begun. And on summer evenings, when the sun set gold and orange over the Nebraska prairie, people swore you could sometimes see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the light fade. The Dalton family never disputed these stories. They liked to think that Catherine and Lucas were still there in some way, still together, still keeping watch over the land and the legacy they had built from tragedy and chance, and a love that had conquered everything fate threw at them. Their story became a legend in Fort Kearny, passed down through generations. The tale of the woman who nearly died in the snow and the cowboy who saved her, of broken bones that healed and broken hearts that found wholeness, of a love that started in the darkest moment and grew into something bright and lasting and true. It was a story about second chances and the courage to start over. It was a story about finding light in darkness and building something beautiful from ruins. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that reminded people that happy endings were not just the stuff of fairy tales. Sometimes, if you were brave enough and lucky enough, they could be real.